Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Teaching in the Digital Area series provided to you by Tech Index. Tonight, we are hosting Charles Fadel with a topic titled as Education for the Age of AI. Let me please introduce him first. Charles Fadel is a renowned global education thought leader, futurist, author, and inventor. He's the founder and the chairman of the Center For Curriculum Redesign, an organization dedicated to making education more relevant for the 21st century in the age of AI. Charles brings a unique perspective to education drawn from his 25-year high-tech career, including a decade as the global education lead at Cisco Systems and a founding Neurodyne, a startup focused on neural networks and artificial intelligence. His extensive affiliations include roles as the chair of the Education Committee of the BIAC to the OECD, and a senior fellow at the Conference Board, and a board member at the USCF, and a visiting practitioner at Harvard's Graduate School of Education, where he explored curriculum redesign in an AI-driven age. Mr. Charles Fadel, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Emine. So I'm going to share my slides for everyone. Here we go. Okay, so let's get going with no further ado. I'm going to very briefly introduce my center, but then we're going to talk about the hype versus reality of AI, employability based on that, and then consequences for education. My center's role is really to think ahead of the pack. We did our first AI in Education conference back in 2014, way before this became hot on everyone's radar. And we also wrote our first book on AI in education in 2018. We have published since a much updated version in just January of 24. So we work typically with a number of jurisdictions. You see here a number of high-ranking PISA jurisdictions, PISA per the OECD test. We work, of course, I work with the OECD, but also the International Baccalaureate and a number of other organizations that you see featured here. As I was introduced, the thing I always like to put forward is that I've been dealing with AI issues for a long time, way before they resurfaced with the acuity they did in recent times. And I was dealing with them at a time where we can only compute 3 layers of artificial neurons, whereas now we can compute 5,000 layers. And the world has changed dramatically, but we're still using algorithms that go way back. These algorithms go back to the 60s, via a detour in the 80s through symbolic AI, where the goal of trying to describe in minute details every single action or every single recognition done by AI, you basically failed. And it did some advances in knowledge representation networks, but it took the 2010s for machine learning to resurface because of all the processing power that emerged. In a previous slide, I was showing you the cell phones, the smartphones, and this has represented 100 million-fold improvement in processing power due to Moore's law with semiconductors. So this is why we are suddenly able, by the 2010s, to do things like recognition and translation and so on. And that's why this spawned generative AI in the 2020s with large language models. So I'm calling this the capable phase that we're entering, from narrow AI to capable AI. And I'm not calling it generalized or general intelligence, because we're, in my opinion, far from having what it takes to come up with devices, with agents that are capable of being as smart as a single human. And certainly very far from having as smart as all humans. Nevertheless, the progress has been impressive. And what has changed from the early machine learning efforts they were trained on very narrow data sets and therefore could do very narrow tasks, like winning at Go, or even folding protein or sorting chemicals. These are narrow tasks, even if the computational space is very large. But it's what we call in engineering a bounded problem. But here with large language models, the data sets are far greater. And so not only do they have expertise in various domains, but also they have transfer capabilities. They can look at something in one domain and see how that applies in another domain. Nevertheless, they're still haunted by the limitations of neural networks. And those are, first of all, they're very greedy. They need a lot of data. Then they're opaque. We're not sure how exactly they converge layer by layer, particularly when you have 5,000 layers to recognize a face, but they work. But for that, you lose predictability. And they hallucinate. When you start tweaking them for one type of response, they start seeing that response everywhere. They will invent that response. They can be over-tweaked. And here's another example of brittleness. Although this has described very explicitly, subtly include a single elephant somewhere in the image where it is very hard to see, it still included the big elephant. So the big elephant in the room here is, yes, they're brittle, they hallucinate. So with all that though, here's why it's still at least accepted by even hype meisters like Sam Altman that AGI is hype, and we're not going to see GPT-5 anytime soon, and if we did, it would not be much better than GPT-4. Basically, we're seeing the saturation of this S-curve because no exponential can go on forever. And so we're focused here in this presentation on what's probable, not on what's merely possible in the distant future. This capable phase, though, is this probable phase is quite important because we have legions of developers. We have tons of money being poured at the issue. We have multiple LLMs competing with each other. There's algorithmic progress going on within, let's say, the space of the algorithms they presently use. We see verticalization of corpora, meaning data sets that are verticalized to healthcare or education or finance or what have you. We're seeing faster hardware all the time, and we're seeing augmented data sets via APIs and LangChains and so on. So this is all to say that even if there's no AGI in the near future, there's still an enormous amount of capabilities that's there, and we're trying to figure out how to harness it. And the problem is that human systems are always too slow to adapt. So, in particular public policy, which is the slowest. And the trick here for all of us is to run to where the ball will be and not constantly be lagging that ball. And that's the complexity here for humans. So let's take a look at employability now. You will see plenty of studies from just about everywhere, here the IMF, but you'll find World Economic Forum, McKinsey, et cetera. Lots of organizations have put out their thoughts on whether or not jobs were going to be impacted and how they were going to be impacted. But in my opinion, all these analyses are oversimplified because passing a test is not identical to doing a task, and doing a task is not like doing a job. I'm going to illustrate this with a very simple example. If you want to do the laundry, of course, you need a cleaning agent, but the cleaning agent is not sufficient to do the washing. You need a washing machine, and a washing machine is not sufficient to do all the other tasks around doing the laundry. And that's the sort of oversimplification we see everywhere, where just because you can clean doesn't mean you can do the laundry. Of course, it's an essential ingredient of doing the laundry, but it's not the only task that's required, or the only, test that you need to pass. So there's that aspect. Furthermore, we are really bad at forecasting the emergence of new jobs. This is from the World Economic Forum. And, even they admitted very openly in 2017 that they never thought that an influencer would ever be a job, and yet it is, to my surprise, but it is. And humans adapt, no one is sitting still, at least in the corporate world. People are feverishly trying to figure out, well, how do I use these things? How do I not get replaced? How do I add value? So to give you a very crude analogy, if you're a bookkeeper, you've learned how to use spreadsheets. And now, rather than just keeping books on paper, you're using spreadsheets to do scenario playing. So now people are trying to figure out, well, how do I take this and augment my work rather than be replaced in my work? And so there's no AGI takes away all the jobs anytime soon for good reasons. No AGI anytime soon, and all the jobs are, that's a very poorly defined statement. So education still needs to deliver regardless. And high school is still a preparation for jobs, partially. So what does this mean for education? Well, if you look at it at face value, you look at Bloom's taxonomy, of course, you can paint a really scary picture saying, well, you know what, the cognitive domain is toast. Well, let's find another refuge. And people will think, well, these things, they don't have emotions, therefore the affective domain should be a refuge. Well, they may not be able to internalize emotions, but they can organize and value and respond to human emotions sometimes better than humans can. And so, no, the affective domain is not a refuge, and neither is the psychomotor domain, right? I mean, you've seen all these devices here and there and everywhere. Sure, they cannot originate behavior unless we give them agency, but once that's the case, they can do all sorts of other things. And so the devil is in the details. There's no one major category where we can find a refuge, even if that was our inclination. The better view of it is to think about the details of all the types of skills and tasks we need to do and see where AI can or cannot help. Does it outperform us? Can it be complementary to us? And so when we talk about creativity, for instance, right, is an AI creative or not? Well, let's define creativity first and foremost. Creativity is these 5 different sub-competencies, and AI can or cannot do some of them and augment us on most of them. Actually, in this case, all of them. AI, however, does not have agency unless we give it to them, like autonomous cars or weapons or whatever. It certainly has no purpose. We are the ones who design the purpose for it. But it does have already an identity of sorts because the data sets it's trained on gives it various biases. It has algorithms that also give it various views of the world, and it has user interfaces that anthropomorphize the behaviors that the creators wants to give it. So that's where we stand. And so schooling, on the other hand, has to adapt. With the Industrial Revolution, with technology zooming ahead of education, we had to adapt and invented mass schooling. With the digital revolution now, we have to adapt and mass sophisticate what we teach and how we teach it. So let's think about the what for a second. We are in a century that is really volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And we don't know really whether we're going to need to be poets or painters or physicians or physicists, or how those jobs are going to be impacted. We may need all of them. We may need, to be a jack of all trades. So the best strategy, at least in our mind, is one of versatility, where education would be like a Swiss Army knife. We give you all the tools, and over time, you will sharpen those tools that you need the most. So it's the T-shaped model that IBM has been talking about for a while now, but that's really making it a reality in education. So what does this mean? That means paying attention to disciplines. So disciplinary knowledge still matters. You're not going to be building skills and character on nothing. But more than ever, the necessity to be creative and critical thinker and collaborator and curious and all these things is going to matter. And particularly the meta-learning aspect, which is really learning how to learn and autonomous learning for students. So all of these competencies are necessary. And we've been talking about this for a long time, but never had the wherewithal to embed them deeply in our education. And so our task is to figure out how to do so explicitly. So let's look at knowledge first. In K-12, why do we teach so much, for example, trigonometry? I'm not saying don't teach sine, cosine, and tangent, but I'm saying don't teach arcsecant. Leave some space for other things. Make the tough choices. Teach data science instead. Teach discrete and computational math. Same thing for world literature. Why so much Shakespeare and so little from everywhere else? Same for world history. Same for performing arts. Why not comedy and improv and debate rather than just acting? And same for visual arts. Why not also design and manufacturing, etc. But also we need to make time and space for modern disciplines like technology engineering, right? I mean, we call it STEM, but we really don't teach the T and an E at all, or to any extent that's noticeable. So, you can easily imagine teaching a number of engineering disciplines and then finishing with high school with a number of technologies like computer science, biotech, clean tech, nanotech, etc. You can imagine, of course, teaching social sciences. If knowing yourself and others is at a premium in this world, then why wouldn't we be teaching psychology, sociology, and anthropology? By the way, the NSF considers that social sciences are STEM as well. And finally, entrepreneurship and business. If entrepreneurship is the job of the future, why wouldn't we be teaching a lot more of that? So the point here is to make all of these modern disciplines a mandatory part of the cursus and not just the traditional disciplines, and modernize, of course, the traditional disciplines. That requires significant investments from jurisdictions into rethinking their standards and curricula. And we don't see that happening, and we don't see it happening at anywhere near the pace that's required. Let's talk about skills in character and meta-learning then. When I co-wrote 21st Century Skills back in 2008, I was very happy to see that a number of countries resonated with the concept of teaching for more than just knowledge. But so here, more than 110 countries have adopted the moniker 21st Century Skills in one way, shape, or form. The problem is, this recent study we did with Brookings showed that not even the most advanced jurisdictions were offering pedagogy or assessments of these skills and character qualities. And so that's what we have decided to do. We have decided to start offering professional development, and we're working on an assessment tool to gather quality and evidence for these competencies. And in our latest book, we've done through a lot of analysis to figure out not only what these competencies are about, but whether or not AI would have an impact on them and in what direction the impact would be. So, for example, in the case of courage, you can say, well, AI is fearless. That's correct. But it doesn't mean that all the sub-competencies of courage are fulfilled by AI. It takes more than just fearlessness. And by the way, it also takes a certain form of metacognition to not go from fearless to reckless. So these are complicated constructs to deal with. And then finally, the personalization angle. This is where, of course, we expect AI to have its biggest impact, but it can also be a big negative impact in the following way. If you are a student, you are going to be, as we understand from psychology, you're going to be a cognitive miser, meaning, like all of us, you're going to try to take the easy way out. And you're not going to be motivated enough if you have something that can respond to all your questions and solve things for you. So the trick here is to create more motivation in the student than ever. And that means helping them develop their sense of identity, agency, and purpose. I don't have enough time now to go into all of them in details, but if I talk about purpose for a moment, this is where we stand. A purpose is certainly doing what you love, but it's also doing what you're good at, not just what you love, but also ideally what you can be paid for to get out of your parents' basement as a young graduate. And ideally, and this is really where we want to push, what the world needs. So your sense of purpose has to transcend yourself. And that is done via projects very easily, because projects are very similar to the real world. The real world is organized by problems and projects, and so is life. And so how do we ally projects and purpose? Well, we have created a database of 340 projects that are lined up with various frameworks out there, like the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the Global Challenges for Humanity, the NAE Grand Engineering Challenges, and the World Economic Forum Deep Shift Technologies. So you see how you can bring project and purpose simultaneously as the student gets educated. And finally, looking at AI as a technology, not as a disruptor. AI as a technology has, of course, multiple applications on the administrative side, as well as the academic side of education. My center focuses really on the academic side. And our view is, first and foremost, we need to create an exobrain, an exoskeleton for teachers, so that they have chatbots that are well-tuned to their disciplines, so that they have lesson plan generators to help them design their lesson plans to incorporate all of the various parameters we were describing earlier in this presentation. It's not easy for them to bring in essential content, core concepts, competencies, formative assessments, pedagogical practices, including but not limited to projects, etc., in a cohesive ensemble. It's superhuman. So we need to really give them a lot of support, and that support can come via modern technologies like AI. In which case, they will spend more time on local adaptations of that content, of that curriculum, and personalized student strategies. And this is just a screenshot of a chatbot we're designing that's based on 138,000 education research papers that are peer-reviewed, so that it hallucinates less and it's a lot more accurate in its responses. Now, is there room, of course, for adaptive learning? Yes, there is. Adaptive learning has always shown promise in terms of learning time reduction for the average of the classroom, but also a self-pacing possibility for the slower performers. We're all hoping for additional gains with AI to solve the 2 sigma problem that Bloom talked about in terms of tutoring, giving the best effect size to any student. But it's not going to be easy to figure out because there's so many different possibilities. What is the ratio between teacher intervention and students fully engaged with the machine? What's the right ratio, knowing that learning is also social with the teacher, with the classroom, etc. And it may be also very discipline specific, meaning in some disciplines like math that are very sequential and threaded, it may be a lot easier to do than in, say, philosophy, for all I know. Just saying, I don't know for sure, but certainly we're going to be having to explore all of these complexities and figure out what's the right blend of all these things. And that may take us a decade. We'll see how we get there. So in summary, there are plenty of capabilities. What I've talked about is the what and the how. I really think we should be paying attention to what, because why deploy all of these capabilities on the how side only to teach the same old things, just better? So it's time for a serious spring cleanup and come up with modernized standards and curricula in all disciplines, add modern disciplines, and then figure out how to teach them even better thanks to technology. So there's only so much I can address, of course, during this session, but I will encourage you to take a look at this book. It's available as a PDF as well as a paper copy from your local Amazon. And it's gotten nice reviews. I'm very pleased with that. And with that, I'll stop my presentation and I'll be happy to hear your questions. Oops, sorry.
Mr. Charles Fadel?
Yes, please.
Thank you for your sophisticated contribution and participation in our Teaching in the Digital Era series. Thank you once again for such an excellent presentation and for sharing your valuable ideas with us. It seems that we have no further questions. Is there some final thought that you would like to share with us?
Well, your audience is mostly a higher ed audience, and they might wonder, how does this apply to them in higher ed? The same overall principles apply. You know, we too in higher ed need to figure out exactly what are we teaching and what's the durability of what we're teaching. It doesn't mean that you don't want to become an expert. It doesn't mean that you don't want to go through the paces of a discipline and become really strong at it. But we may decide that everything that we've had on the docket is not quite as important as we think. We have to clean up a bit, and that's valid for all disciplines, all branches of disciplines, and focus on the deep understanding of the discipline rather than merely the ability to just become an expert. And so that deep understanding, I'm going to explain what that is in terms of content versus concept. In mathematics, we're taught exponentials, and we know what exponentials look like. What we are not taught is that exponentials have properties of being deceiving then explosive. Now you'll say that's not mathematics, that's an interpretation for the real world. Now I'm saying, yes, what's wrong with that? We need this interpretation for the real world in all the disciplines, not just for those who practice the discipline, but for the users of the discipline. So imagine for a second how many trillions of dollars we would have saved with COVID if politicians and others understood what an exponential means, understood what it means to be deceiving than explosive. They would have reacted much faster, hopefully, because they know that every minute passed, you have far faster cases than in a linear situation. And so just because you have 18 cases this weekend doesn't mean that you're only going to have twice as many next weekend. You may have 10 times as many, etc. And it can grow even faster. So that's the complexity. And even if it was just to double every week, that would be already enormous. And so that's what people do not understand. It's not that, it's not just about the content of a discipline, it's about the concepts behind the discipline. And to do that, you have to teach them explicitly. They're not something that magically appears because you have spent so much time with literature or with equations or whatever. These need to be explained explicitly as part of an education. And I'm sorry to say, as my daughter was going through her college years, her linear algebra professor refused to give her an example for physics, which was her major. We cannot afford this kind of attitude. So that's these are my parting words. I hope that higher ed, ramps up and continues being true to its mission, but knows how to adapt fast.
That's what we're hoping so. Thank you so much once again.
My pleasure.